I have the honor tonight of introducing, I don't want to say Dr. Thomas because I feel like it's more like my mentor, Dr. Thomas. And, you know, I met Dr. Thomas when I was a freshman here and I'm about to graduate. And one of the first things that those of you who will notice when he starts speaking is he's very animated and he's very intense at the same time. So when I first met Dr. Thomas, I got a slew of questions about my career. I was asked what I stood for in life, and I was really made to think. And this was over lunch, so I didn't eat much that day. But you know, after thinking about it for a really long time, I realized that the most important thing that Dr. Thomas had to teach me was to believe in my own story and to believe that it's possible to integrate everyone else's stories into your own. Whether you go off into the world here in Maryland or somewhere else in the US, or as he's done with elders all around the world. So I'm honored to have him here. He's won the Nobel Prize for Goodness and has developed the Eden Alternative and the Greenhouse and has authored so many books, truly an interdisciplinarian. And his books are in the back. At the end, if you'd like to talk to him and sign them, or get him to sign them rather, for you. And we'll, without further ado, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I want to begin the Petrovich lecture by saying it is good to remember those who came before us. It is the duty of the living to remember those on whose shoulders we stand. And let this night and this lecture be dedicated to Dr. Petrovich. Okay? The second thing I want to do before I really get started is I need to ask a certain kind of permission from you. And it will take me a minute to explain it. And if you're willing to consent, I think we might have an enjoyable evening together. The thing is this. In this room right now are people who are smarter than I am. People who've gone places I've never gone. People who've studied things I've never studied. Read books I've never even seen. Spoken languages I can't speak. Right here in this room right now is every extraordinary story. And I feel welcome here, and I feel a part of this audience, but really, I'm the same as you. And the thing to ask permission for is to spend the next 40 minutes or so talking about my life and my experience. And I need to make it really clear, it's not because I think my life or my experience is any better than yours, because I don't think that. It's not because I think I'm more interesting than you, because I'm probably not. It's because a story has the ability to illuminate. And by me telling you my story, I hope to illuminate that would not be possible if I just stuck only to facts and figures. So in some ways it can seem preening, overconfident, conceited, I think, to stand in a room of such smart, accomplished people and spend the whole time telling my story. But if you will give me your permission, I'll tell you my story in a way that I think will be helpful and useful to you. Thank you. Now let me just tell you something right here. Storytelling is a very ancient art. And the best of the ancient storytellers always asked permission to tell the tale. Because storytelling isn't just blah, 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 a sound coming out of a box. Storytelling is a relationship. We've just given each other permission. So shall we start? Let's go. It was 1987, and I was just out of medical school. I was an intern, and I was working in an emergency department in Rochester, New York. I was on duty. It was a pretty busy day. And then a man came to see me, came right in through the doors. That's the kind of thing you often see in the emergency room. Came in through the doors, holding his hand, wrapped bloody rag like this. Coming to me for help. I'm an intern. Made me a little nervous. But he came to me for help because at home he had reached down to pet his own dog, and the dog had attacked him, grabbed a hold of his hand, and started tearing at the flesh of his hand. The man pulled his hand away, got away, and his hand was, well, it's after dinner, and this is not a medical audience, so let's say it was, there were several lacerations. We'll put it that way, okay? And we got him in, and got him up on a stretcher, and then I heard the second part of his story. He was terrified beyond all measure of needles. Truly terrified. Some of you might even share this fear. I think he took it to the next level. So he was in extreme pain, blood dripping off his hand, a hand mutilated by the attack of a dog, and he could not even begin to think of the idea of receiving a needle, a shot, for pain medication. What to do? So I leaned over him, and I looked him in the eye, and I asked him this question. Would you be willing to try hypnosis? He's like, ah! I think that's kind of how he put it. Yes, he was willing. And so I induced a hypnotic trance and gave him the suggestion that he'd lost all sensation below his elbow. His breathing settled down, heart rate came down, blood pressure came down. Then I got a bowl of that weird brown liquid called betadine, and I got some brushes. And I dunked it in the betadine and started scrubbing the lacerations. Perfectly comfortable, not a bead of sweat on his forehead. Cleaned the wound. I had to cut away some tissue that was too damaged, and then repaired the wound, put on the dressing. Then I gave him a post-hypnotic suggestion that his hand would remain numb for 24 hours. And then I helped him come out of the trance in a safe and effective way. And then by then I got him up and got him in the sling, got him out to the, wrote him some prescriptions for some antibiotics and some other things. And he's like, Doc, that was great. And I watched him walk out of the ER, bandaged up, clean white dressings, and in no pain whatsoever. And on that day, I really felt, maybe for the first time as a new graduate and everything, for the first time, I felt like a physician. Now I want to take you to 2003. In Greece, in the Peloponnese, up in the highlands of the Peloponnese, there's probably people in this room who've been there. I went to Epidaurus in Greece. Why did I go to Epidaurus? Well, obviously, it's the site of the ancient temples of Asclepios. Yeah. And who was Asclepios? The god of medicine. The god of medicine. I went to the ruins of the ancient temple of the god of medicine. And to get there, you drive and drive and drive, and you wonder, boy, people who wanted to get there really had to be dedicated. And even in a car, it's 19 miles from the nearest sort of settlement village up into the highlands. When you get there, it's up in these beautiful, beautiful hills. We were there in August. So quiet. And I went out into where the temples were, and the biggest part of the ruins, I just want to say, is what's left of the housing that was used for families who would bring the sick to the god, for the priest to care for him, for the one who was ill. And one of the smaller parts of the ruins was actually the temple. And the theory was this: the person who was sick would come to the temple and would lie down to sleep and would have a dream. And in the dream, the god, Asclepios, would talk to the patient and tell them what was wrong. And in the morning, when they woke up, the priests would question the person about their dreams and then use the dreams, which were instructions from Asclepios, to guide the treatment. You think that sounds maybe a little crazy and not effective? What we also found when I toured the temples of Asclepios was they had recovered a whole range of instruments from these ancient Greek temples, and that showed that actually they had a very active and probably, judging from some of the instruments, probably a pretty effective medical practice. Without x-rays and without sonography and without antibiotics. Actually, I think they did pretty darn well. Two other things. On the grounds of the temple of Asclepios was a athletic grounds where games could be held. And next to it, right next to the temple, is the best preserved ancient theater for Greek theater. Beautiful theater. So later that night, we went to see a play there. And that reminds me of the ravens. Now, you're thinking about the football ravens, right? Don't try to kid me. I'm not talking about the football ravens. I'm talking about the bird ravens. Did you know that the raven, the bird, used to be multicolored with all the most beautiful multicolored plumage? Did you know that? Anybody? You didn't know that, did you? Do you know why ravens have black feathers? All has to do with Asclepios. Turns out Asclepios was born to a virgin. It happens. You might have heard of other situations where this has happened. Anyway, Asclepios was born to a virgin, and the dad, Apollo. Coronis was the woman. Apollo, well, he was that way. And he got together with Coronis. She got pregnant. And then she decided to marry a mortal man. Can you imagine such a thing? Well, in this story, things did not go well for Coronis because Apollo turned out to be kind of jealous. And when he heard that she was going to marry a mortal, he came down and built a big funeral pyre and put her on top of it and set her on fire. Well, those beautiful ravens, they were so heartbroken by what was happening that they flew around the funeral pyre calling out. And the smoke that rose up from the funeral pyre, the soot from the smoke got on their wings and changed them from multiple colors to black. And it was in their grieving for the death of Coronis that the raven became black. And you think about that this fall, when you see the uniforms and the helmets and stuff. Well, yeah, that has to do with Asclepios. So here's what happened. Apollo, hearing the ravens crying out this way, he said, I am being kind of a jerk. So he came down and did a cesarean section, or you might call it an Apollonian section, and cut the baby out of Coronis's womb and gave the baby to the centaur named Chiron, and Chiron raised him up. Now, there's a little more for you to know about this. This is Asclepios. He's a man, right? Born to a god and a woman. Well, what happened is the centaur Chiron taught him so well and so effectively that he became so good at healing that he could even raise the dead. Now Zeus did not like this because the power over life and death was not supposed to belong to a human. It was only supposed to belong to the gods. Zeus, he could be irritable, grouchy, you know, and so he hit Asclepius with a lightning bolt and killed him. What happened? All the humans on earth all cried out and lamented and stopped worshiping the gods because their great healer had been killed. So finally, Zeus took pity on the human beings, and he raised Asclepius up from the dead and made him a god. And he became the god of medicine. His symbol, anybody know? The staff with the two snakes, that's the symbol of the god Asclepius. So when Blue Cross Blue Shield sends you their bill or whatever, and they have that on there, or the doctor's office has it, or the ambulance, sometimes you see it, that's ancient Greek mythology that they're talking about right there. Okay. Oh, it's 1996. I'm living on a farm, working a farm, raising cattle, bringing in hay. I have a sawmill, maple syrup operation. I have 5 kids. At that point, the oldest was 7. Wait a minute, 10. Oh, yeah, it's a fog. And we're living off the grid. No television, no electricity other than what we generate ourselves. And all of the farm work is done with draft horses. So unlike a lot of the professors you run into, I am actually a Teamster. What is a Teamster? When you hear Teamster, you think of the union. Teamster is someone who can drive a team. So I had 4 draft horses, each weighed right around a ton, between 1,800 pounds and 2,000 pounds. And I would go out to work in the fields and the woods with the horses, pull them out of their stalls, hook them up, harness them, drive them around to the piece of equipment, back them up, hook them to the equipment, and go. And I'm going to tell you something. There is something you learn working with animals this way that you do not learn behind the wheel of a tractor. And one of the things I did with the draft horses is, in addition to the farm work, sometimes we would have friends come and stay with us who were studying about aging. We'll get to that later. And I would take the horses on a long looping path around the farm. The farm had 400 acres, and it was quite a lot of work. But anyway, I would take them around, and then there was a place where the horses would climb a hill. And I'd be driving up the hill, get about halfway up, and then turn the horses off to the side. Why? I'd turn to my guests and say, why did I stop the horses? And they'd all be like, I don't know. And I would say, listen. Birds? I don't know, you want us to hear the birds? Listen. 4,000 pounds of horse flesh, winded. As a Teamster, I was listening. I was watching their flanks. I was watching how they moved. I was watching the lather on their sides. And I could see when they were starting to get tired and pulled off to let them gather their wind. And here's something that's so different. When you live a life that is surrounded by a womb or a cocoon or a prison, whatever you want to call it, of technology, you lose your hearing, you lose your sight, you lose your sensitivity to the experiences of other living things. And being on the farm and working on the farm and driving horses and caring for horses and raising cattle, that connected me to the essence that I am surrounded by the living. For as long as I'll be here on this earth, I will be surrounded by the living. Very, very important. Then there was a time in 1999 when I wrote a book, a novel, about a mythical land called Calamos. I made it up. A place called Calamos, where people lived in a culture and a society where elders remained at the beating heart of their world, where elders had a place and a station, where elders were connected to each other and to the young, where elders had a voice. I wrote that book and then decided, well, I want to get this out there, so what can I do? So I took the novel, the book, and I converted it into a play. And then I got sponsors who underwrote a bus trip for me that went 10,000 miles in 30 days. What happened is we took all 5 kids, my mom and dad, and a niece, and we got onto the bus, and the bus drove us to a city overnight, during the night, and we slept on the bus. And then during the day, my parents took the kids, and my wife, Jude, and I would meet with people and talk about aging and talk about the care of elders, and in the evening, we would stage the play. It's a one-man show, 2 acts. And when I started the tour, I thought to myself, you know, I am going to get so bored doing this show 27 times. When I finished the tour and we closed the show in Washington, D.C., I thought to myself, I am only beginning to scratch the surface of my understanding of this thing that I wrote. We don't see the meaning in so much of what's around us. We miss it. And I'm telling you this story because I wrote the damn book. I wrote the play. I performed it on stage 27 nights in a row. You'd think I would know what was up. I did not know what was up. I was only beginning to understand what this story was really about, what it was really saying. So why great theater, great art endures for thousands of years. And by the way, this is not great theater and great art, but it's the reason why those things endure. They endure because a story can transport us. So over the last couple of years, I finished writing the sequel to that book, which is here, and will be coming out in book form soon. But this story follows up on the first one about Calamos I told you. And I want to say to you, from the point of view of being interdisciplinary, interdisciplinarity is a technique or a tool. The things it is passion. Without passion, you don't get the heat you need for fusion. It's passion that provides the energy. It's passion that gets you out of bed. It's passion that keeps you up late at night. Not fear, not striving, not ambition. It is passion that does those things to you. And to find your passion and then to embrace it is to enter into a world where it ceases to exist. And I know that, my boss, the dean, Judah, is here. But I do want to confess in front of him entirely, I don't work. He's kind of aware of that already. I don't have any interest in work. I don't ever want to work. I like to do what I like to do. So one of the rules I've made up that I've followed, and it has worked very well for me, that I want to share with you, don't do anything that you don't want to do. Now, this sounds like advice you would give if you wanted to spoil a toddler, doesn't it? No, that's okay, honey. You don't have to do that. But at your stage of development, it is very important that you know why you're doing what you're doing. And you will be led, and people will lead you into doing things you don't want to do. Let them. Medical school, maybe you don't want to. Writing a novel, maybe you want to. Farming it with no electricity, maybe you don't want to. Doesn't matter. The rule is, don't do it unless you want to. It saves you quite a lot of misadventure if you can follow a rule like that. Does it mean you will not yourself? Oh no, you will exert yourself. Imagine having 5 small children, running a farm and a medical practice, and writing books at night, and you get an idea of somebody who's exerting himself. But I did all of that stuff because I wanted to. Too often, especially for the younger people in the audience, too often you feel that there's some kind of covert contract that you're engaged in that says you've got to do this or you've got to do that to please somebody, or to, even worse, not disappoint somebody. You will have great struggles and difficulty, and you will not find your authentic, true self and life until you stop doing things because other people want you to. Have I made myself clear? Did anybody notice that I repeated this point 3 times in a row using different language, pacing, and phrasing? Did anyone notice that? I was telling you a story. And because, very important point, I was using the storyteller's motif of repeating a refrain for you so that you would remember it. And now, you know what I'm doing now? I'm stepping outside of the storytelling frame in order to draw your attention further to this lesson. Don't worry, we're going to step back in the frame in a minute, and we'll go on with the story. But that's how important that is. So, in my life, I've been a farmer, novelist, a physician, a father, a musician. But the number one thing, if I had to mark it down, the number one thing I have been, I am now, and I will continue to be, is an amateur. I am an amateur. I am an amateur at everything I do. We'll go to 2009. In 2009, I was in a little store in the town I live in, and I saw one of these, you know how, especially put up the little flyer that's photocopied with the numbers on it that are torn and you tear one off, right? That hasn't been replaced by Craigslist yet, has it? They still do that. Okay. Anyway, I saw one of those flyers, and it said, anyone can learn to sing. Now, when I was a kid, I was told at church, don't sing, just move your lips. I was in junior choir, and then it was like, maybe you would if you sat with your parents during the service. I was told I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. So I said to myself, I'm going to go study singing. I went to this voice teacher, who turns out to be a great teacher, and she goes to the piano, she plays a note, dun, 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 and I go, ha, 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 ha. You know, she's like, no, that's not even close. 5 notes away. Not like a flat. And I realized, and what she taught me was, there are sounds in my head that are not made by my ears. That music is something that plays in your brain. and that your brain can learn new stuff, and that I could learn to hear the pitch of a note and then sing that pitch. And I mean, I have a great family because they put up with me studying, sing a pitch. It took me 6 months to learn how to sing, match a pitch. Okay? Why did I do this? Am I ever going to be a professional singer? Am I ever going to be America's Idol? I'll guarantee you not. I did it because I'm an amateur. I love being an amateur. The word amateur comes from the same root of that means heart. That's what amateurs have. They have heart. I don't take anything away from professionals, la-di-da, but amateurs, they have the good stuff. They do it because they love it. So it's good for you to think about being an amateur, not at one thing, at many things. And I've heard a little talk this evening, visiting with people, about interdisciplinarity and the idea of combining two fields or two points of view. You know, I guess that's good for a baby step. But really, you want to expand your whole life, the range of frameworks and ideas and the range of tools that you can weave together. That's a good starting point. I'll give you that. But it's got to grow from there. It's got to be more than just two. For my, this goes back to 1966. The person outside of my family that I owe the most to is Mrs. Kunte, librarian, Town of Nichols Library. I grew up in a working class family. Other than the Bible, there weren't any books in the house. We just weren't really a book house. Mrs. Kunte saw that I loved to read, and she shoveled books at me. And I read, and I read, and I read. And it turns out that I have a particular kind of view on things that I didn't learn the name for until later. It's called Autodidact. I turn out I'm an autodidact. What that means is I love teaching myself. Most of my learning is stuff that I have taught myself. And I love taking the different pieces that I've learned and sticking them together in novel and different ways. So let's talk about aging. Let's talk about 1992. I was a medical director at a nursing home, and I was really pretty bad. Because my view of medicine up to that point was rock 'em and shock 'em, emergency. They have a name in medicine, they call it wet hands. Do I need to go further? I love that stuff. And I took this side job at a nursing home. And I was doing the work, but the passion wasn't there. And one day, a nurse came to me and said, "Oh, you need to see Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith has a rash on her arm. You got to, take a look." I'm like, "Yeah, I could diagnose a rash." I go down the hall. I go in the room. I mean, I am terrible. I do the, "How are you today, Mrs. Smith?" the way they do, to older people. And she's like, "Honey, I'm not hard of hearing." Sorry. And I look at the rash on her arm, and I can tell her what it is, and I can tell her what cream is going to fix it. And this is a very old woman. And she's lying in, and I start to excuse myself to go, because I'm a very busy man. And she reaches up and takes a hold of my arm and pulls me down over the bed. So my face is right over her. She looks me in the eye and says, "I'm so lonely." And it was like an arrow to my heart. And I kind of staggered out of the room. And I wrote my note and I ordered the triamcinolone cream, which I'm sure you would have done as well. And I went home and I could not escape. I was going to fix the rash on her arm and she was going to die of loneliness. So I started going to the nursing home when I wasn't working, and I started taking notes, writing in a diary. And I start to see what's really happening there and the suffering that's happening there. And I had this idea that that nursing home wasn't just a nursing home, a skilled nursing facility. It was really a world, and that was a world maker. So, you know I love stories. What's the most famous world-making story in the world? Yeah, the story of Eden, known all over the world. And I realized, how about that? In that story, there is a clear indication that human beings were meant to live in a garden. That's plan A. Well, you know, plan B, well, that's another whole complicated story. Plan A, live in a garden. So if we have a chance to make a world for frail older people, plan A or plan B? I'm going plan A. I'm going to try to make that nursing home as much like a garden as I possibly can. Less like a hospital, more like a garden. That's the Eden alternative. The Eden alternative started in one nursing home with my wife and I in one little town in upstate New York. It spread to all 50 states, all the Canadian provinces, spread to Europe, Scandinavia, to the Faroe Islands, to Iceland, to Greenland, to Japan, to Singapore, to Australia, to Tasmania. It's for the world. Why? Because it offered the people who care for elders a new story. And that's what they needed most of all. A new story. So I've been able to teach and travel all over the world, which is really great and fun, and I'm really proud of that. But the thing that traveled around the world a long time before I did was the story. If you want your work to succeed, you must be able to communicate your work as a story. Do not tell me 8 credits of this, 16 credits of that, because I'm actually not that interested. Tell me the story. Tell me what it means, because the story can go all the way around the world. Now, we're going to do some Q&A if you're up for it. But I have to leave with one more story, right? The raven. I told you about how the raven got the black feathers, except that was wrong. There's another story about how the raven got black feathers. You might not know this, actually, but there was a time when the whole world was dark. Night. It was night all the time. There was no light. And all of the animals were fully sad and afraid. I mean, think of it. Dawn never came. That's hard to even imagine. Well, back in those days, among the most beautiful of all birds was, of course, the raven. And the raven decided that I think it was probably she when I think about it, she would do something dark. And the reason the world was dark was this. A shaman had captured the sun and put it in a box, and he was keeping it for himself. And so he kept the sun hidden away, and the only thing that could happen was for the raven to sneak into the shaman's house and to use his beak to open the latch. You know how clever these ravens are. And opened and he reached inside and he took the sun in his beak. Now think about that for a minute. And then he flew out of the shaman's house, and he flew up higher and higher, and with every beat of his wings, his beautiful plumage fell off because of the tremendous heat of the sun. And his eyes which had been so bright and cheerful, got so dark. And he flew higher and higher and higher until at last he got to the sky. And in the sky, the raven put the sun in the sky where it is today, even now. And this effort so exhausted the raven, so completely worn out and tired was he, that he just fell down, tumbling down. Imagine this bird, once so beautiful, with such beautiful plumage, now once with such bright eyes, falling down, twisting, and all his feathers charred black by the heat of the sun, until at the very last minute, poof, he landed on the soft earth. And he lay there not moving. And all of the animals came to their side. And listen to this. The tortoise came and stood beside the raven and spoke of the raven's courage and his wisdom, spoke of his strength and his daring. And he said, "So it shall be from now on, that the meat of the raven shall no longer appeal to the hunter, and the raven will never be hunted again as a reward for this great deed." And so the raven is not hunted. And so it was that all of the animals paid their due and paid their respect to what the raven had done for them all. Think about it. Dr. Petrovich, thank you. The raven, thank you. Always, always we give thanks to those who've given so much to us. I'll say one last thing. For those of you in this room who feel a stirring in heart to give to those who've given so much to all of us, to give to our elders, to be with them and to care for them, if that stirs in your heart, then you are in the right place. You can learn to become an amateur. You can learn to blend the many strands of thought and experience and knowledge and wisdom necessary if you will take good care of the elders. Thank you. Thank you.
We'd like to add you to our INDS family.
Well, thank you very much. I'm loving that. Thank you very much, Lawson. I would be happy to entertain. We can all go home. It's all good to me. What would you like to do? Professor, do you have a question?
How did you memorize an entire book and perform that show? Did you perform it? Did you perform that show completely from memory, or
Yes.
did you have notes?
Well, here's how I was able to perform the entire show from memory. Our brains are wired for stories and narrative. So I did not have to memorize a whole book. I had to memorize the pieces of the story. I memorized the pieces, and then I put the pieces in order. Furthermore, and musicians in the room will know about this, there were times where if you try to pick up one of the pieces and it's not in order, you play it. Some musicians know about this. So part of memorizing it was being able to have the pieces come in each order, and the one before would trigger in my mind what would come next. And so without a narrative arc, I don't have enough brain to memorize all that. With a narrative arc, actually, it wasn't that hard. Not that hard. Yes?
I'd like to know how you convinced your family to travel with you.
Well, you know, the passion is infectious. And they all shared in the enthusiasm for what we were doing. Because, you know, we were going out and going to all these cities and seeing all this stuff, but it was for a reason. It was very arduous and very difficult, but we were doing it because we believed in something. And what made it possible, I think, for the family to come. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks, Dr. Thomas. As always, great.
Thank you.
I had two questions, really.
Okay.
How does an autodidact get through medical school, first of all? And second of all,
Yeah.
you talk about changing cultures of aging and things like that. Just in the title, it's not easy to change institutions and mentalities. I mean, it's great work you do, but can you give insight of?
So there's two questions. First is, how does an autodidact make it through medical school? The second is about changing culture. Here's the first thing. I have the blessing of growing up in a very poor rural community where there wasn't even the idea of attention deficit disorder. It did not exist. Clearly, I was a person who would nowadays be labeled with attention deficit disorder, and nowadays I would be medicated in almost every situation. To be very clear, I failed 6th grade. They promoted me out of 6th grade just because the teacher, there was only one 6th grade teacher, did not want me back. That's straight out. So what happened is this, as best as I can understand it. I have a neuroscientist friend who bounced this off. But what happened is I was gifted with an incredible amount of stamina and energy, which I invested in harnessing this crazy racing mind, and I was able to put that mind to work. If you were to ask my family, they would tell you that I have a ferocious concentration which blocks out all other stimuli. The reason? I had to overcompensate. I couldn't be like a normal person. I had to overcompensate in terms of concentration in order to wield sort of the discipline of my mind. Last thing, autodidacts make fantastic interdisciplinarians. Autodidacts can go one of two ways, in my experience. They can be really brilliant, great interdisciplinarians, or they can buy a cabin in Montana and try to blow people up. They can be quite dangerous and foolish and conspiracy-minded. Autodidacts, it's not a free lunch. I happen to go that way, although sometimes I look like the other kind. The thing about being an autodidact and going to medical school is that I arrived at medical school with extremely powerful skills of concentration. Anybody in the room who is thinking about medical school, what getting into and going to medical school requires a manic commitment to focused, consistent effort. That's what they're selecting for. You don't have to be that smart. You don't have to be that good. You have to be able to maintain concentration over a long period of time, over a common kind of curriculum. That's my opinion. Culture. Changing culture is about getting a group of people to begin telling themselves a new story about themselves. The story we tell each other about aging is rotten, awful, horrible. Okay? The story we tell is aging equals decline, and it's pathetic. And that old people are just mere shells of who they used to be. And that if we're compassionate enough, we'll stand by their side while they wither away and die. That's the old story. The new story is, elders are a vital component of a healthy human society. We are becoming more and more elder rich, and those of us who work with elders gain much more from them than we give. That's the thing. You can't get the culture to tell itself a new story, you don't change the culture. Yes, question here.
I'm interested in advertising and the culture of aging. So how do you think contemporary advertising affects the culture of aging?
Well, the question is about advertising and the culture of aging. You know, the most common observation is most advertising is very ageist. A friend gave me a magazine that was supposed to be oriented toward a positive vision of aging for women. Turned out to be pretty ageist, in my view. And the magazine rack as a whole is pretty ageist. But there's a few people out there who've been trying to run counter to that. If you've seen any of the advertisements for Dove, anybody seen this? Yeah, okay, there's some good stuff. It's not exactly lighting the world on fire, but they're sticking with it. And I think their branding is around the idea of pro-aging, which is something I really endorse. There's a question here?
Yeah, I was just wondering, you've traveled all over the world and seen how lots of cultures deal with aging. Were there any cultures that really struck you in the way that they just sort of include elders into the society and just sort of keep them there?
Yeah, in my view, seeing what I've seen, and let me be clear, I'm not talking about non-industrial societies. I don't go there because they have traditional ways of approaching aging. That's not the terrain I'm on. I actually deal with aging in industrial societies. So within industrial societies, Scandinavia is the best, in my opinion. When they build apartment complexes, they build in daycare, they build in senior services, they put things together. They're really, I find them to be very forward-thinking in how they imagine supporting elders as esteemed members of the community. Not saying that there's not faults, but if you had to rank them, I would put Scandinavia at the top. Among industrialized nations, no offense to anyone, I would put Japan at the bottom. Because in Japan, the rhetoric around aging is way nicer than the reality around aging. That's an unfortunate fact for them. Yes?
Maybe this was your talk this afternoon, but I would like the story that you share when it's time to tell a parent, maybe you shouldn't drive.
Well, King Lear has a nice piece on it. Did everyone hear? Let me just say, what do you say to a parent who's having trouble with driving and isn't doesn't appear to be safe on the road? And how do you, in a sense, have a conversation about taking away the car keys? Follow me on that? Well, the common idea, mostly, is that we're worried about our older relatives and driving is dangerous, and you see them getting into the car and they can't turn around to see what's behind them, etc. The first thing I would just say, practically speaking, is there's lots of ways to help people drive more safely, common sense stuff in terms of what vehicle they have and how it's used and education that can be offered. So my first thing is I'm a strength-based guy. So I want to say, well, yeah, maybe she's not safe now, but could we help her be safe? There's room for growth. People can get better at stuff. It's not just, so maybe their driving's been going like this, but maybe it can go like that. What's available? How are we going to do it? That's one part. Second, I will appeal sometimes to people's sense of, and elders, many elders have this, feel this very strongly, a sense of duty and obligation to others, in the sense that I know that you clearly you want to keep driving, but we want to think about other people on the road and think about what risk you're created, not for you, I know it's okay with you, but think about what risk is being created for them. It's the second thing. Now I'll just wrap up with King Lear. For those of you who remember the play, King Lear goes into retirement, and yeah, it's a little messy. Anyway, he has two daughters, there's three daughters, but in the play, these two daughters conspire to take away his retinue of knights. And they keep bargaining him down from his retinue of knights until he gets down to like one knight. And that's an analog for the conversation you're talking about. And history regards these two daughters as villains. But in some ways, their father was acting pretty weird and bizarre and crazy. In some ways, they were using common sense. So here's what I'm saying. There is no easy way to have that conversation about your parents giving up the car keys to you. That's not easy. Never going to be easy. But if you approach it from a strength-based point of view and as a collaboration that includes not just you and your parent, but the community around you, sometimes you can have an easier time of it. I will never say it was easy. And I've been through this conversation a lot, as you can imagine, as a geriatrician. Let's do one or two more questions, and we're kicking you guys out. Steve?
Okay, now I'm ready to ask a question.
All right.
There's a difference between an organization that has a message or a vision statement and an organization that truly comes up with a new narrative or story. What do you think makes for a powerful story, number one? And I thought your story was very powerful, and the moment that really struck me in the story is the woman saying to you, I am so lonely. And the question in my mind then was, why was that a transforming moment for you? Other doctors might have walked out of the room and said, I think she's depressed, she needs antidepressants. So I'm saying, what makes for a powerful story, and why was that, and we see, from my perspective, a powerful story, there's a transformation that occurs through character. Why were you transformed?
Good. So you, in a sense, part of the answer is given. What makes a powerful story? Characters must change. And I mean, all my kids, growing up, I have a whole trove of stories for each child where they are heroes. And I teach them how to take the characters and create conflict, resolve the conflict, transform a character, and end the story. I mean, I teach my children this explicitly and help them practice being storytellers. And I don't know if a lot of you, did that happen for a lot of you? Did your parents teach you how to tell a story? Now, a lot of us absorb it if you're in a faith tradition and there's some powerful storytelling going on all the time and you can just absorb it. But I think it's good to be practiced at it and try to do it well. If you look at the raven story at the end, the raven is transformed. He comes into conflict with the shaman, steals from the shaman, which seems in some ways an illicit act. It has this ultimate sacrifice of nobility and then is transformed in a way that is perpetuated through the ages. Okay. Here's what I'm saying to you. You've got to, and I think, Tommaso, this is very interesting, that you said what you said at the beginning. I guess if you hang out with me, I'm going to want to know your story. And you're going to want to be able to tell it to me, because if you're not living your story, what the heck are you actually doing? You're taking courses or something, I don't know what. This is what you're all involved in is a grand narrative that spans decades, and you're the star. What is the story and what does it mean? Now, why did this woman touch me so? Something I didn't go into really, but I did grow up in a working class family, and where I grew up was actually in a real, honest to God crick holler in Appalachia. And there was my house, my grandmother's house, my great-grandmother's house, my great-aunt and uncle's house, and Mrs. Maurer. But there was this little, up on a crick holler, there was this little cluster of houses, and as a kid, I would run into and out of the houses of my older relatives exactly as if they were my own house, was my own house. And I think what happened is this woman was crying out to me, and it was my blood. it was my family. It was not the other. And she called to me. And if my great-grandmother had called to me like that, you know what I would have been there. And she called to me in that voice. And I honestly have not ever been the same since then. And that's how that is. So, last question in back. I'll repeat the question.
Could you describe for us what an institution that would be Eden? How did you turn a place that's really an institution into a garden of Eden?
Okay, the question is, how do you take a institution like a nursing home? Raise your hand if you've been inside a nursing home. All right, so I'm not gonna, you know what I'm talking about. How do you take a place like that and make it Eden? The very first thing you do is you do not hang your hat on perfection. You will never have perfection. Forget about it. Even the original Eden, things were messed up. There was the eviction and the domestic violence. Oh my God, it was a mess. So the first thing you do is you set people's expectations so they don't believe they're creating something that's perfect, because they're not and they never will. Number two, when you have a situation like a nursing home where expectations are catastrophically low, if you can just do better than that, you make people's life better, okay? I don't have to make a bunch of millionaires on Palm Beach happier than they are now. I have to take this lonely old woman and make life a little bit better for her. That's something I can do. Third thing, this gets back to being skillful with technical means. We chose, for example, to change the nursing home physically by injecting, I say injecting, I'm using a medical metaphor, plants and animals and children into the environment. So we built a daycare center in the nursing home. We brought 1,000 plants into the nursing home. We got dogs and cats. We got a total of 400 birds. Every elder had a bird. I just want to tell you, Dr. Ronch was part of launching my career. He actually advocated for this in Albany, New York, at the very beginning of my career. Anyway, we injected these things in, and then we took on the power relationships between the management and the staff. And I guess I'll wrap up with this so everybody can get out and you got studying to do and stuff. We made one simple rule that is easy to understand and difficult to follow and helped people embrace it. The rule is this: as management does unto staff, so shall the staff do unto the elders. If you can name the things that you want the elders to have, can anybody name? What do you want the elders to have? Family, companionship, time, dignity, love, peace, patience. You can anybody in the room can name it, right? You have to create a management culture that strives to give to the staff what you want the staff to give to the elders. When you put those two things together, the changes in the environment and the changes in the management culture, you can take steps toward Eden. I mean, you can't make a paradise because that's not possible, but you can make it better. And that's what this is about. Those of you who are going to go out and change the world, you're never going to repair it all. Never. You can just make some part of it better. And that's the best we can hope for. Thank you, and good night.